Thom, how can enlightenment and spiritual growth be measured?
There is such a thing, and my dear old friend, who's now, like me, an ancient old man, Robert Keith Wallace, wrote a beautiful book entitled The Neurophysiology of Enlightenment. And as a scientist, a UCLA PhD graduate, in the study of the impact that meditation has on the physiology measurable, he was able to come up with what we call the parameters of the enlightened state. And it would look like this. We have an imagery which comes to us from the ancient Upanishads. Upanishads are a subsection of writings of the Vedic worldview from ancient India, in which three spheres, let's call them balls just to make it easier, three balls are described. One is granite, one is made from modeling clay. British and Australian people, Commonwealth people say plasticine, but Americans don't know what that is. Modeling clay, and then foam rubber. And so then granite ball, it's rigid, it seems to be invincible until you study the lines in the granite, and you can take your mason's spike and tap it, and the whole granite ball goes in half. Something that looked like it was invincible, actually, because of its rigidity, is rendered very weak. In fact, it's only angularly rigid and invincible. Turn it on this angle and it'll split in half easily under the slightest pressure, especially a sudden pressure. Now we have the modeling clay. The modeling clay, instead of being rigid, is malleable. That's the word for it. I love that word. You can squish it like this with your fingers. You can flatten it into a pancake. But the problem is it has no spring back. And so if you make it into a pancake and leave it on the mantelpiece, some archaeologists will find it in 100,000 years, half petrified, and say, they must have known how to make pancakes out of modeling clay. It doesn't know how to go back to its original spherical configuration. So you have rigidity, which ends up having vulnerability. You have malleability, which doesn't know how to spring back. Now we're going to examine the third ball, resiliency, that which is resilient. So resiliency, you take the foam ball, the rubber ball, you squish it flat like a pancake, and it will conform to the distorting pressure. When you release the distorting pressure, it goes straight back to being a sphere. You can roll it out onto the freeway and let the 18-wheeler semi-trailers run over it, and it'll go squish, bounce, squish, bounce. With each tire that runs over it, it goes flat and returns to spherical again, and then flat and returns to spherical again. Resiliency. So we need to examine how enlightenment and resiliency go together. And enlightenment, it's not that we can't get stressed. Stress is, in fact, a survival mechanism that we all possess, and it must never be eliminated. It's the ability to survive if Daisy the tiger comes wandering in here with her yellow, murderous eyes. Before the zookeeper captures her, if you do not have a stress reaction, then you're not human. Climbing the curtains, I'd be climbing the curtains with anybody else. So getting stressed in the presence of Daisy, fight, flight, chemistry and all that, very appropriate. Staying stressed once the zookeeper comes along and captures her with his giant butterfly net and takes her back to her little pussycat cage at the Metropolitan Zoo, continuing to be stressed after that is not relevant. Someone who got stressed and stayed stressed and had PTSD and had to see a psychiatrist for the rest of their life because of something that happened that took 10 seconds, this is a loss of an entire life of relevance because of one 10-second experience. Somebody else who's been practicing Vedic meditation for years, they don't have that ability to stay stressed. The stress comes in, think of the foam rubber ball, here it comes, the flattening of the sphere. The stress comes in, it flattens you, that is to say, it distorts you, and as soon as the distorting pressure goes away, you go back to full homeostasis again. Homeostasis means the normal, natural, full spectrum repertoire of the human body and the human cell mass. So, distortion from homeostatic back to full homeostasis, and within seconds. So the capacity to bounce back is the sign of enlightenment. Enlightenment just means the mind is no longer impinged upon by now irrelevant stress chemistry. Something to me is ancient if it's yesterday. Ancient stress chemistry. What happened yesterday? Well, chemically, it's not there anymore. It's just not there anymore. And because it's not there in the body anymore, it's not in the mind anymore either. And so the mind and the body are not on this vicious cycle feedback loop where the chemistry makes me have anxious thoughts, and the anxious thoughts feed back into more stress chemistry, and the stress chemistry makes me have anxious thoughts again, and the anxious thoughts feed back into more stress chemistry. The vicious cycle. As a meditator, we lower the excitation, we dissolve the stress chemistry, and the dissolved stress chemistry yields really good tidings of comfort and joy in the body, Christmas card, and the mind gets the benefit of that, and it's a cycle of mutual enrichment. Body feels better, mind feels better. Mind feels better, it creates neurochemicals of betterness. Betterness reflects back into the mind again. Mind reflects it back to the body again. So someone who is a practitioner of Vedic meditation has an immeasurable advantage, particularly if they've been practicing it for years. They have entrained into their mind-body setup the ability cyclically to respond to distorting pressures and to be resilient and return back to full homeostasis again. And so there are ways that we can measure that. And the ways that you measure it are to look at the style of functioning primarily of the brain. Our brain, in order to reflect an enlightened state, has to start operating globally. Our brain, under stressed circumstances, becomes unilateral, not bilateral. That is to say, someone will say to you, sometimes with various kinds of pride and things, I'm a left-brained kind of person. I'm left-brained, meaning analytical, accounting, numbers. I have high numeracy, or I have high literacy, but it's very specific language, computer coding and analytical skills and all of that. And everything in my house is in very neat little places, and, I'm like that. Somebody else goes, I'm right-brained. Right-brained, where you're going to make the assumption their house is a mess, there's papers everywhere, there's unfinished laundry over in that corner, and, but there's lots of beautiful artwork all over the walls, and they've been, painting the ceilings and things, and, there's, weavings hanging off the ceilings and whatnot, and, they have birds flying around and whatever, it's like, these are extreme stereotypes just to prove a point. I'm right-brained, says one person. I'm left-brained. Well, actually, you're a half-wit if you're either one of those, because your brain is a whole brain, and it's supposed to all be operating. This idea that I can't do anything linear, because I'm artistic, I'm an artiste, and, I'm an accountant, I can't really think artistically, but I'll hire some creative person. This whole idea is a construct of a society that's grown up with stress retarding brain function, causing the brain function to lose its full spectral array. We're supposed to have 100% of our brain at use. So what happens when we practice Vedic meditation? The brain begins to behave as one giant neuron. Instead of being, in our cerebral cortex, we have somewhere around 10 billion neurons. That's in this part of the brain. The whole brain and the whole nervous system is about 100 billion neurons. But here we have about 10 billion neurons. Instead of them pulsing at random, which is like a sparkle of electric pulses, on, off, on, off, on, off, on, off, which you can measure with an electroencephalograph, and you'd see a kind of lots of disturbing wave functions coming from the different points of the scalp that you're measuring. EEG measures different points of the brain by measuring different points on the scalp. Instead of seeing the sparkling, what you tend to see in meditation is the whole brain going from the quiet state to the active state, from the quiet state to the active state. And it appears as though all the neurons are operating at once in both sides of the brain, left and right. And the brain begins to modulate its functioning in such a way that while meditating, you're in a state of hyper-coherence, supreme coherent global brain functioning. Now, this is interesting from the following perspective. We can see this style of functioning in the brains of a non-meditating person when, if you happen to be lucky enough to measure their brain right at the creative moment. I call it the aha phenomenon. When they're solving a problem and they've done all their hypothesis testing, and then boom, they suddenly get it and they have the solution, then for a few seconds, maybe 10, 15, maximum 30 seconds, their brain goes into hypercoherence, synchronous brain functioning, both sides of the brain. And then it gradually deteriorates again and they go back to regular functioning, left-brainedness or right-brainedness dominance. But in a Vedic meditator, you're getting that state of consciousness, that state of brain functioning for a solid 20 minutes. You're sitting in the prototype of pure creativity for a solid 20 minutes. And your brain is learning how to behave that way. It's learning how to retain that style of functioning. It feels good. It produces more yummy chemicals. And the brain likes those yummy chemicals that it knows how to produce. And so, as a consequence of that, as you keep practicing, layer after layer after layer of stabilized global brain functioning begins to appear in the meditator. And so you take someone who's been meditating for 10 years, 11 years, 12 years, and you measure their EEG in a lab, they have brain functioning, the style of optimal brain functioning, that you would ordinarily see only during meditation in a beginner meditator. But they have it with their eyes open, and they can talk to you while their brain is in that global left-right bihemispheric global functioning in a state of pure creativity at all times. And then you can subject them to some kind of stress test. Like, for example, take the hand and put it into an aquarium full of freezing cold water. Feels kind of nice at the beginning, really cold, icy water and all that. 30 seconds later, it starts hurting. About 1 minute later, it's really uncomfortable. 2-3 minutes later, you'd pay anything to get your arm out of that cold water because it's sitting at about 1 degree Celsius, just above freezing. It's stressful, completely harmless, doesn't hurt your arm or anything, but it's stressful. Now, in a non-meditator, if you give them the icy arm experience, then it takes them up to 15 or 20 minutes to recover. In a meditator, you take the arm out, dry it off, let them sit and meditate for a few minutes, they're completely recovered. It's the foam rubber ball. Squish it and it bounces back. Squish it and it bounces back. The resiliency. So enlightenment is something that is measurable. There is a neurochemical base for it, just the exact right balance of transmitters such as dopamine, serotonin, anandamide, balanced levels of dehydroepiandrosterone sulfate, DHEAS, which is the anti-aging chemical. Meditators produce a lot of DHEAS. All these different chemicals that normally only appear in people for short periods of time are flowing in the bloodstream of an advanced meditator. Styles of brain functioning. And so then enlightenment is not something that's purely of the mind, because as is the mind, so must also be the body. And so then, who's enlightened? Well, we're going to know by styles of brain functioning, enhanced, improved, optimal brain functioning. The ability to have relevant styles of functioning relevant to the moment. In other studies, one notably done by David Orm Johnson back in the 70s at the University of Texas, he exposed two groups of people to stressful stimuli and measured their bodies while they were experiencing the sudden loud noises, which was what the stressful stimulus was, unexpected sudden loud noises in the room. The meditators, when they heard the sudden loud noise, had a larger reaction than the non-meditators on the first application of the noise, first presentation. But on subsequent presentations, second, third, fourth, and fifth, they rapidly adapted, knowing that the loud noise, the noisy and annoying, was not dangerous. Their brain allowed them to adapt, and they almost stopped responding at all, even though these very loud 100 decibel noises were appearing in the room at random for a solid half hour. But the non-meditators, they heard the sudden loud noise. Their initial reaction was smaller, not as sensitive. But their subsequent reactions got subsequently larger and progressively larger. Every time those klaxon horns went off, they got more stressed than they were the previous time. At the end of the study, the meditators walked away not stressed anymore. The non-meditators walked away completely jangled and having to take, painkillers when they went home. So, you have adaptation, first, hypersensitivity, beautiful, a higher stress reaction on the initial presentation than the non-meditating calloused group. Calluses versus no calluses. And then rapid adaptation in meditation and rapid acceleration of irrelevant stress reactivity in the non-meditating group. So we're looking here at what the neurochemical, neuroelectrical, and anatomical substrates are of an enlightened consciousness state. The growth of sensitivity, resiliency, rapid return to homeostasis, the ability to feel more finely than average, to have heightened perceptual acuity, and yet the ability to come back to normal quick, compared with someone else who didn't meditate, who would have, a series of very irrelevant reactions for far too long.